When you got the script, what about it compelled you to make the movie?
When I was a kid, I was an enormous obsessive fan of big epic fantasies. I loved Tolkien. I love Star Wars. In fact, Star Wars was the first movie that I remember seeing in the movie theater. I loved the films of Akira Kurosawa and Steven Spielberg and Ridley Scott. These epic films, these big epic fantasies like Lone Wolf and Cub. And this film offered me an opportunity and the whole crew at Leica to paint, in those exact same colors of these incredible epic fantasies. And what's more, it spoke to me on a number of different levels because when I was a kid, I fell in love with animation. I fell in love with fantasy. And also, when I was around 8 years old, I took a trip to Japan for the first time with my father. And I grew up on the west coast of America, in Oregon, which is very different from Japan. And going back 30 years ago, there was nothing I'd ever experienced in my life to that point that compared to that moment. To see this incredible place, this beautiful, almost otherworldly place, and how different it was than my experience. It was eye-opening for me to see this whole thing. The art, the architecture, the food, the music, the style of dress, the movies, the comic books. And in fact, when I left, I had this big bag of manga comics that I poured over, even though I didn't speak the language. There was something that was just potent about the visual poetry of it. And that spoke to me deeply. And so that was the beginning of my love affair with this incredible art of this great culture. And this movie took all these things that I love and combined them, and it was like it was tailor-made just for me.
Do you relate to Kubo on a personal level?
I do, in fact, yes. It was funny because, as an artist, you're supposed to be attuned to things. You're supposed to be sensitive to things. And it wasn't until we were fairly deep in the process that I recognized the similarities between my own life and Kubo. Kubo is essentially, he's an artist, he's a storyteller, he's a musician, he's an animator, really. He brings these things that he creates to life. And I realized basically that's me, that's what I do. And what's more, his whole life revolves around his mom at this stage of his life. She's the center of his universe. And when I was that age, the exact same thing was true for me. My mother was my closest friend in the entire world. And this film explores those moments in our lives where those things begin to shift and then change forever. And as we cross that Rubicon from being kids to being adults, and that experience that I had and the experience that I've seen my kids go through was something that I could pour into this movie.
How did you guys decide to make Kubo with only one eye from the beginning?
Well, it's part of it's the cost. I mean, I don't want to get too deep into what's going on in the story. I don't want to reveal too much about what happens in the movie, but it's part of the cost of his heritage. His eye was taken by his grandfather. His grandfather has nothing but disdain for humanity, and he's perfect. And there's a lot of metaphor that's at play there, but the idea is that so Kubo, his missing eye represents a scar from his past, and he's ashamed of it. And in fact, he tries to hide it with his hair. He's got this hairstyle where the hair drapes over his eye, and he's not some emo goth kid that's got a cool hairstyle. He's actually trying to hide what he feels is something he's ashamed of, scars. And the funny thing about scars is that scars are, they are symbols of hurt, of pain. But they are also symbols of healing, because after you've gone through some kind of a horrific thing and you have a scar from it, the scar is actually what knits us back together and makes us whole. And so by the end of the film, Kubo understands that the thing he's scarred by and the thing that he's been ashamed of is just part of who he is, and altogether that thing makes him whole, and he's not ashamed of it by the end of the movie.